So you tell me what you want me to talk about, and I'll talk.
No problem, no problem. Because
Yes,
I've learned a lot of new words in your book. You know, you've taught me a lot in this book. It's well, we hey that yeah yeah. So we are. Let me. This thing is echoing. We are live now, sir. Let me make sure I get off of. There we go. So family, the real Nordic Black family. This is Robert Gillen, or some people call me Rob G. We have Professor Benjamin Isaac in the building from Tel Aviv University. He is an Lessing Professor of Ancient History at the University of Tel Aviv. He is a member of the Israel Academy of Sciences and Humanities and the author of The Limits of the Empire, the Roman Army in the East, and also this book right here, The Invention of Racism in Classic Antiquity. This is his. See how thick that book is. It's about over 500 and some pages there. I had this book for about, I think about 3 or 4 years now, and I got it on Kindle. I always wanted to, yeah, reach out to you and talk to you about some of your conclusions and your writings in the book. And what better time to do it than COVID time? I recently started this YouTube. Well, I had this YouTube channel for a while, but I recently, you know, came back into using my YouTube channel during COVID-19. Um, and I wanted to interview people that I felt, yeah, taught me things and or inspire me, uh, whether it's authors or entertainers or just people that are doing things. And you were one of them. You were on the list. Uh, So I would like to start where, well, first your background. You are what's the Lessing professor? I haven't heard that term. That doesn't mean you're lesser than a professor.
it, it is it is a chair, a special chair for an ancient historian that was that was donated, contributed by a family called Lessing.
Got you.
So it is named after Fred Lessing and his wife, who donated the chair, and that is a special chair that that gave me funds for research.
Got you. Got you. And so you still are a professor at Tel
I'm
Aviv University or a lecturer.
I'm retired,
Okay.
but I teach. I still teach.
Got you.
Yeah, I teach and I'm active in the
Right.
university and in the Academy of Sciences and Humanities, and I still have graduates I
Got
supervise.
got you. I actually there was another book that talked about racism in classic antiquity, and they often referenced your book. I don't know if you heard of. I should have had it on the side. Let me see if you heard of this. Hold on 1 second.
Yes,
I
um,
told you. I told you it was going to be a casual conversation, so no big deal. This.
this book.
Oh, you need your glasses or something like that, or
So I could show it to you from my bookcase as well. I've got it.
oh, you have that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it it is it is a good book that gives you basic information and tips.
For the audience purposes, I'm just putting it up to
Yeah.
the camera. So this is another book that talks about race and
Yes.
ethnicity in the classic world, and they reference Professor Benjamin Isaac's work a lot that I've also put to the camera. You
Yes.
guys definitely got to go purchase this. If is it still in circulation or
It is. Yes.
yeah? Okay, yeah,
It is available. Cambridge still prints it, and it's available through
yeah,
any online bookstore you
got you.
think of.
And so as you were saying, so this book by these people here, it was like it was kind of like a shortened version of
Well, they've got their own views, and
Views and takes, correct.
it is more intended for students and a broader readership than my book was.
Absolutely. And I can tell you guys that.
So it is uh, my book was meant as an academic book, and if I may add this, it came out 17 years ago, and so I wrote it 20 years ago when racism was a bit less of a hot topic than it is now. Of course,
Mm.
always was a topic and has been so for centuries.
See, audience, you heard that. Coming from his mouth, he said about 20 years ago when racism seemed to be less than a hot topic than it is now. Because
Yes,
yeah, there you go. Yeah,
yes, it is. No, you can hardly look at, say, the New York Times a day without this being a topic now. For in 2000, of course, it was a topic for people who suffered from it,
yeah,
but it was less uh, focus of broad
yeah.
broad attention than it is now. So that's why the books now seems to it continues to be read by people.
Right, right. Now, would you say that far as during the times that you growing up, you racism, as far as racism is concerned, you feel like it was worse back then?
It
I mean, I know they have the media attention now, social media and all kinds of new,
I,
yeah,
I was born immediately after the end of the Second World War. So uh, there was a very recent experience of racial hatred in Europe then,
right, right,
Nazi Germany.
right,
That was more anti-Semitic and anti-Gypsies than skin color.
right. But well, especially, well, I mean, in Europe, of course, yeah,
And in the US, well, you don't need me to tell you how
yeah,
different things
right,
were then.
for sure,
And
for sure.
when I grew up, I remember Martin Luther King.
Mm,
But that uh, when I was a small boy, it the U.S. was a different place.
Now I want the audience to if you just tune in, um, uh, can I call is they call you professor or doctor?
Uh, You can call me Ben or whatever you like.
I'll call you Professor. Professor Benjamin. He's in Tel Aviv right now. So just want you guys to know that I'm now talking to him from Tel Aviv in Israel. Um, yeah, and yeah, well, that segue into your background. So what was your background a bit? And I feel bad for having you talk because yeah, let me know if yeah.
Oh, my background is Dutch, uh, Jewish,
The,
Jewish and Dutch. It's born immediately after the Second World War. So when I was born, I was safe. My parents had fled to Switzerland in
right.
1942, and
Memory.
they went back to the Netherlands in the summer of 1945, and that's where I grew up in Amsterdam.
Got you.
I grew up in Amsterdam. I studied at the University of Amsterdam classics, history, archaeology, and then uh, my wife and I moved to Israel in 1972.
Wow. Wow.
So we've been here since then, but have spent a lot of time in the Netherlands, the US, and the UK.
Okay. So obviously you still speak the language,
we,
Dutch.
uh, we speak Dutch, my wife and I, our children, we speak Dutch with our dog.
No,
And
well, I heard you speak Hebrew, that's for sure. And the one video that I found on YouTube as
oh,
I was scouring the internet.
well, yes, I teach in Hebrew,
Right, right,
about
right. What age were you when like when you made it in 72?
I was 27,
Okay, okay,
born in 1945.
okay, okay.
We, went to Israel with a master's degree, and then did my PhD in Tel Aviv.
Okay. So was the language barrier for you, was it that difficult? Did it take many years to get it down packed to where you are
Well,
to be real proficient or?
I had experience because in the Netherlands, as it was then, we learned a lot of foreign languages. So
Got you.
I grew up with English, French, German, Latin, Greek.
Right.
Add a little Hebrew to that. That wasn't too much of a challenge, but of course people will recognize that I speak Hebrew with a Dutch accent, as I
Okay.
speak as I speak English with a Dutch accent.
Right. Right. Got you. Now, as we get to the book, um, I wanted to talk about, I guess we can get into the intro. Your take on racism, your understanding of racism, because when you get into classical antiquity and yeah, in those times, racism kind of came in different forms, or proto racism, as you like to call it.
Yes, there was no term for it then.
Right,
Greek and Latin don't have a word for racism.
right.
So,
So it's the conceptual,
yeah.
yeah,
And then the intention of the book, is easy to say in two sentences. Racism can mean various things. It can mean that uh, a black or colored person walks in the street and they shout at him,
hmm,
or it can mean that you've got a theory that a specific group is inferior because the group looks different, their skin color or their face. Um, those are theories.
right,
And what you had in Nazi Germany, based on centuries of of writings, was a theory that specific groups are inferior.
right,
What you have in the US is a history whereby people with a specific skin color are treated as a group, maltreated as a group,
hmm.
and they have,
More structural and systemic, as we
yes,
call it. Yeah.
and they got theories, pseudoscientific theories
Hmm.
that claim they can prove it.
Right.
Because if your nose is like this, then
Blumenbach or Linnaeus, so yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yes,
Stuff like that.
then so what I was was arguing when I wrote the book is not that the Greeks would have negative views of blacks or yellow or whatever.
Hmm.
That is obvious. Wherever there have been people, you have that. The
Good
point is
point.
that I
Yeah.
argued that the Greeks and Romans developed the pseudo scientific argument where that would try to prove some people are less qualified than others, and but they didn't, of course, they didn't have Newton, they didn't have genetics,
Right. Right.
but
They,
they,
yeah, they
yeah,
had and we were going to get into that. They had other factors like environment
yes,
and things like that. Correct. And we're going to get into that. I saw that you had a quote that you said that is a description of your views, close to your views by G.M. Fredrickson, the one that's about racism originates from a mindset that regards them as different from us in ways that are permanent and unbridgeable.
yes.
You, you remember that quote? Yeah.
I remember the quote, and I would add that it also denies individual differences. Uh, for the Greeks and Romans, all Northerners, Gauls or Germans, they were all tall, blonde, courageous, and stupid.
Mm.
You wouldn't find exceptions.
Mm.
all Syrians, Phoenicians, Easterners were clever but weak. So you had no individuality. You
And also, you talked a lot about the Asians. Not necessarily you, but you brought out the point that yeah.
so climate and geography determined people's characters,
Mm.
and so you had the ideal in the middle, and that were they themselves, the Greeks for the Greeks and the Romans for the Romans, and that's why they also were entitled to rule the world,
Right.
because
Right.
they were the best.
Right. Now, when we're talking about, I was just in my audience, and I guess you can chime in. When we talk about racism and the proto-racism and the origins of it, we're not talking about like the individual. If I see a heavy or set person, and I think I want to call them fat or ugly or what have you, of course you're going to have those things in the human interaction. You know, you're going to have certain stereotypes and certain things. But we're talking about something that now has became as systematic or structural or in a bigger sense. We're trying to, that's the form of racism we're kind of talking about or trying to get into, or that you try to trace the origin of.
Yeah.
And you speaking of the origin, you started it pretty much from you say the 5th century BC. That was kind of your origin point.
5th century BC.
Right.
Uh,
Oh yeah, I want to go right back to that quote, because at the end of it, you say that, well, the quote again, racism originates from a mindset that regards them as different from us in ways that are permanent and unbridgeable. Now, I just put a question mark, do you feel that, that it's a racism is a permanent thing, that it's not able to be fixed? I mean, because at the end of it, that's the only part that permanent and unbridgeable. So I'm sure you don't adhere exactly to that quote.
all right.
And it wasn't your quote; it was G.M. Frederickson. I understand.
I wouldn't say that racism is everywhere, always. No, it
Right,
very much depends on where and when.
right,
And
right.
so what I've seen in antiquity, in Greek and Latin literature, because that's what we have. I can't go to a pub and listen to Roman speak.
I understand. Yeah,
It's in the literature. The
yeah.
literature was being read in the Renaissance and afterward. It was popular, and they learned from the literature good things, democracy and equality, but they also learned the bad. And the Aristotle, the philosopher, tells you exactly how to handle slaves.
Mm.
Because they were slaveholders, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, and so
Now, by saying that, because when you say the word slaves, that buzzword, everybody, oh,
yeah.
they ought to, they sometimes they associate it with the transatlantic slavery, like the chattel slavery. What
Um,
what what's what was the was it were there some similarities?
um,
And
the,
well, all slavery is bad, we know that, but I'm just saying, like, what it is different context, that historical context.
you had some industrial slavery, but less so because it was not an industrialized society. And you had individual slavery, servants in
Right.
households, and they became slaves because they were uh, defeated in war by Greeks or Romans, and then sold en masse.
And although our topic is not slavery, and one to the audience, I don't want you guys thinking I'm always trying to cut him off. I'm trying to save him from talking so much. Obviously, as you can hear. So yeah. But as far as slavery, I know that's not our topic. Our topic is racism, but they kind of they have a synergetic relationship in a way.
Yes.
Uh, so uh, yeah. So no, this the slavery that we're talking about, like you said, from wars and in certain things, but that slavery then, in your opinion, were wasn't like the generate like pass on to generations and things like that. Per se, some were like this. Yeah, one time you could see them a slave. They worked their way up to be a military leader or even a
What you had
during that time. Yeah.
large scale in Rome was was release from slavery. Individuals could gain freedom from, and that happened large scale, and then they became immediately citizens, Roman citizens. That happened a lot.
Yeah.
And one should also distinguish from society between societies. The Syrians, Jews, Egyptians all had their own society and their own ways of handling slavery. It existed,
Absolutely.
but um, there there is a connection between the early form of slavery or early form of racism, proto-racism, I claim existed, and slavery, because it was the argument was that then, and that is Aristotle, the philosopher, people con- defeated by the Greeks, Northerners or whatever they were by nature and by geography and climate inferior to the Greeks. So they were better off as slaves
Mm.
because they couldn't, they had no independent judgment. That's the argument. I'm not saying that.
Yeah, you're
It's
reflecting what the
what,
documents say, what the evidence says. Yeah.
yes,
Now, like I said, we go into a lot of the historical records. You go into a lot of historical records. That's not to say that proto racism or whatever didn't start even before that. It's just that we don't really have the record preserved to show.
we we read what we have,
Right.
and
Yeah.
and a lot has been lost because there was no printing press in the 5th century
Right.
BC.
Right.
There was books were copied by hand,
Right.
and not all books that were copied by hand in the 5th century exist
Right.
are extant nowadays.
So you still stand by that time frame as far as the 5th century BC, as far as written in evidence that we got pretty much is.
That's what we have.
Yeah.
That's what we have.
Got you. Now, also in the intro, we still in there. Race. I read a quote also. Racism, properly understood, can be claimed to represent sets of ideas, the roots of which may be found in Greek and Roman society. The proto-racism. So, are you in essence saying that white people or people with the lighter hue invented racism or racial behaviors?
There were, well, varied responses. Many of the people who studied classics and study classics are great admirers of the ancient literature,
Mm,
Greek art, uh,
obviously.
and and many Greek historians of ancient Greece are proud of the, the Athenian democracy that was a fact of life.
Of course.
So some of them did not like it at all. Others were convinced. So let me say that the reviews I've seen, let's say 40 or 50 reviews, about 10% did not like it at all,
Mm,
but there are many were convinced and accepted it. And some were convinced, but thought it should my theories should be modified.
That's what I was going to ask you at some point about the backlash that you got from writing this.
Well, the backlash, there were people who say he shouldn't have focused on the Greeks and the Romans so much. What about China? What about the ancient Jews, the Old Testament? Well, my answer is simple. I don't read Chinese, and I know Hebrew, but it's not my field. I'm not an Old Testament scholar. So I can only say that I've covered the period and the culture I know about. And so that's one point. The others would say it would simply say that I've neglected important topics. I didn't write about the status of women. Yes, 500 pages was enough, I felt, and in another 500.
Must I show the?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a thick, very thick book, over 500 some pages. It definitely it would have took.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there are topics that I haven't written as much as I should about skin color. In this book, well, there was a reason, because skin color was less of a topic.
Obviously.
Greeks and Romans hadn't conquered Africa, south of what is now Libya or Morocco, south of Egypt. So it was less of a point. Of course, you could
less exposure per se as well. Yeah.
I have written something about it. There was in Athens a fashion of having black slaves. That was a mark of status, because they were rare, and there weren't many of them.
Yeah, I remember that point about the Athenians. Yeah, and specifically, yeah.
Racism is also a factor of quantity. When I went to grammar school in Amsterdam, there were hardly any blacks in Amsterdam. So we got an American boy in class.
An African American like me, right?
Yes, and nobody cared, because that was rare. It wasn't.
Right.
They laughed at him because his name was Bill, and Bill in Dutch means butter. So then they said, "Your name isn't Bill; it is Willem." But then in a little later came blacks from Suriname.
Gotcha.
And then you had.
Speaking of a little connection with Suriname, my grandfather, my father's father, is from Georgetown, Guyana. So
Right.
that's yeah. So before he made it to the States, where my father was born in Mobile, Alabama, and therefore, so that's a little really close, like neighboring. And one. Yeah.
So you get racism partly as a response to numbers.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, how can you know anything, or if you don't, I mean, if you're not exposed to it, so you wouldn't. Yeah, that's definitely a factor. I was turning my head because I see one book. I wanted to ask you, since it's a casual conversation, I wanted to ask you real quick. I'm gonna grab it off the shelf. Hold on.
Yeah.
Here it goes. And I should have had this prepped and ready on the side, but this book right here, because I tried to reach out to this lady. It's fairly new. I forget. I don't know. It's 2018 or 19.
Yes, I've seen it, and clearly
it's a pricey little book.
Yes.
I and I definitely reached out to her because I wanted to talk to her about her findings, but I haven't got any word back yet. But you haven't read it.
I have read it, and it is a learned book. It's a serious. but we have got a different viewpoint. She said
Absolutely.
it is the Middle Ages, and I claim it goes back earlier than that. And the Middle Ages, I think, are a different problem. So
you know, me as a layman, I'm definitely more on your side of this, and I think a lot of people that I, you know, associate with or conversate with are on the same. No, I'm just showing the audience as well.
yeah.
This is another book. This is just I show some of these books because some of these people think that I don't be reading books around here. You know what I mean? Or I'm just pulling up random people for what reason or whatever. Anyway, but
And
yes, yeah. So that yeah,
because
the
race,
invention of race in the European Middle Ages.
race,
Geraldine Hang, and she's an Asian descent
really,
lady, and I think she's out there in California, a professor out there. And I want to, you know, put up these books. I want to again put
yeah.
up your book.
Well,
But
my topic is racism.
right,
Her topic is race, and that also is a difference between the U.S. point of view and the European point of view.
right.
Because I grew up.
But in a sense, yours was yeah. I mean, yours was. I mean, back then. I mean, when you talk about the origin of racism, what do you mean? What do you mean U.S.? There was no U.S.
Well, no, there was no U.S.
Right.
Uh,
So,
race.
yeah.
Uh,
But
my,
I get what you're saying, her point of view. But still, I read some of, you know, and yeah, it lost me on some things. I definitely want to talk to her about some of I can't believe it was. I hate to say it, it was written, but anyway, go ahead.
I would always argue that racism exists. Race, I don't know. Yeah, you when you've got a dog and he or she is a cocker spaniel, that's a race.
Mm, mm,
When you have um, human beings, they are so mixed through the ages that I'm not sure that it is.
but then in a modern context, some people would disagree with you when you say a race. Yeah, yeah, but I get what you're saying. I totally get what you're saying. But some people, as far as races, they say that's you know they're purely on social construct and things like that.
There is the
But
point.
but
Yeah.
I yeah, but I absolutely get what you're saying.
In in
Uh,
what- in British English of a couple of generations ago, they called a people a race. You had the German race, and that
right,
wasn't a race in the sense that they had a certain skin color. It was simply a term for a people or ethnicity. And in Europe, when you say race nowadays, they mean black or Asiatic or and so but I'm not sure that it's a useful term. I know there are differences, but
right,
what makes it important is the social situation.
yeah,
Is there discrimination? Are there are people being discriminated against because they are have a certain skin color or are aliens, immigrants, whatever?
right. Now, what was the earliest text where you found? Was it Herodotus or Homer? Excuse me, Homer.
What are
Or when you talk about the origins of racism,
um,
what would be the earliest text?
the
That-
earliest text is a medical text. Um, Airs, waters, places. It is a text which claims that um, the environment and geography determine the
who was the writer? This one again? You said
it, a medical writer, Hippocrates. If,
right,
if it was he and not someone else who
right,
just claimed to be Hippocrates,
right,
it was a 5th century BC text, and it was very influential. And they claim it claims that in the north people have uh, more blood,
mm,
the physically blood, and that's why they are courageous, tall, and they fight well, but they're
Mm.
also stupid because the sun there's not enough sun for them. In the east, in the east,
You see how funny how things flip around in today's context in a way. Back then they say that they were beautiful and strong but stupid.
yes,
They're talking about these northern white people, like Norwegians would have
but
bit fell into that category for sure.
certainly,
Scandinavians, yeah,
yes, and Germans, and then you in the east, the Near East, they meant, of course, they didn't know about China
China and all that. Correct.
um, so in the East there was more sun, life was comfortable, so they were
Although
clever.
China, I don't want to, Chinese people here. Although China was doing its thing back then as well,
Oh yes,
for sure. So we're not saying China wasn't around. We're
China
saying
was there, but
we're talking about the European, framework, the perspective. Then, so of course, yeah. So when
I'm writing about the fifth century authors who knew the world as it was then, and they hadn't. In the Roman period, there were some people who visited China, some ambassadors.
right,
Second century AD, they
right,
they got there, but in the fifth century BC, nobody knew about. They knew a bit about India, but not
right,
about China.
right, right.
And so the East people were clever, uh, but spoiled and spineless. So you wouldn't want them as soldiers. The people you wanted as soldiers were Italians because that was the
And
idea.
and also I heard about the weather.
Whether,
If the weather was stable, then they were
yes,
lazy or something. If the weather was always
oh yeah,
extreme, kind of have many different extremes, then the people were, resilient. They,
yes.
type of people, of course.
And the point is that they really believed that this was generally true.
Right.
All Northerners are born like that. Not all of them. You've got exceptions. You've got
And
uh,
this is before there's a book by a professor or retired professor, I forget, at Harvard, Nell Painter,
yes,
no Irving Painter, where
yes,
yeah, I have that book over here too, and I don't want to get it, what I'm talking about. And
yes.
she talks about what was my point? Oh, and this is before the term Caucasian came on the scene.
Yes, Caucasian is a
It's a
that,
later yeah,
that's
development. Yeah.
not in my days.
Not in your days, and not into your study
You
focus.
had, of course, people from the Caucasus, but
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it wasn't a term then for
Correct,
this
correct.
group. Um, yes, no, Painter. Yes, we met. I
You met
remember
Painter. Okay,
conference at Yale.
okay. Wow, wow, wow. No, we're going all over the place, and that's good. That's my style anyway. I got ADD, so. But speaking of that, I was going to ask you: have you had any media, like African American kind of black media, interview you before?
Um, no, not.
Hey,
It,
Are you telling me I'm the first?
I've been interviewed by Israelis and by Dutch and by some British people, but not African Americans.
Not African Americans. And you've written I think a pinnacle of one of the bedrocks, a book on the origin of racism right here. You
Ye-
and I think a couple of others probably, right?
yeah,
Um, you're definitely in the discussion.
I don't know whether you can.
Yeah,
I
I
see
see it.
that.
Yeah, and
Yeah, there are,
you're part of that book too. Yeah, the
yes,
origins of racism in the West,
yes,
and this book
that,
right here.
yes, and
Um, and
this,
it's funny how a lot of people, and especially in my home country, and even here, they talk about racism, this and that, but nobody's even heard of you until now. Now they're gonna act like they heard of you after
uh,
they see this video.
there are too many footnotes and too many quotations from
Yeah,
strange authors, so people people rather have something easier to read, and that's my choice that I write the way I do.
right, right. Okay. No, so no, yeah. So that no, I'm the first African American, a pioneer in the game. There we go. So we're gonna get into chapter 1, superior and inferior peoples. We're not gonna go through the whole book. So superior and inferior peoples, where you talk about this conceptual framework in which the Greco-Roman attitudes towards other
Yeah.
people as defined in the introduction, 5th century BC. Um, you were saying that there was never was a form of racism that resembled the 19th and 20th century, which was based on biological determinism.
Newton hadn't been born yet, so sorry, Darwin hadn't been born yet, so
Right,
they couldn't use those concepts. They used different ones that were were around at the time.
right, right. And so you get into environmental determinism,
Yeah.
as we spoke of, and then heredity, acquired characteristics.
Yes, that that was the belief at the time. if uh, if you had a bump on your head, then your children might inherit it.
Mm,
Also, if you were studied hard and diligent, your children would be more diligent.
right, right,
um, so acquired characteristics could be transmitted to the next generation,
right, right.
and that meant that if you uh, if if you lived a good life, then your children would take over.
Mm,
um, there also is another important factor
and
that
that was, were you about?
we
Yeah, go ahead.
yes, we live in an age where there is perhaps a lot of injustice and frustration, but we believe that eventually things may improve, and that's been around with us for several centuries.
Mm,
And just as all
good
of us
point.
know, we all know that we'd rather not go to the dentist in 1850. So this in antiquity there was no belief in progress in that sense. There was no culture of invention, improvement, technical improvement. So there was a belief that things were gradually deteriorating.
Mm,
So,
absolutely.
so uh, the grandfather would be superior to the grandchild as
Obviously.
a
Yeah,
general pattern.
right,
So that leaves no room for inheritance.
right. Uh, so if folks are now tuned in, again, I'm talking to Professor Benjamin Isaac, the creator, the author of this work right here, The Invention of Racism in Classical Antiquity. Also, I forgot to mention that this other book that I know that some people interviewed, Rebecca, I think Feudo Kennedy, Dr. Yeah, which they draw a lot of work from Professor Benjamin Isaacs. I've seen somebody, an African American or two, interview this lady right here, but they never interviewed the man that I got on here. That which they drew their work from. Anyway, so getting back to that, climate and geography, obviously this part right here, when you talked about the good form of government, is an essential ingredient in shaping people. That too was a very important factor that you got onto that I was, I yeah, that I didn't think about so as much. Could you just a little bit elaborate on that? Having a good form of government.
Yes, it was
Uh, yeah.
that was a Greek a Greek idea. they 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 thought about government a lot, and they did so with partial good results. They, after all, invented an early form of democracy.
Mm,
Athenian democracy existed. It was a real thing. It wasn't what we nowadays would enjoy as a form of democracy because you there was slavery. We mentioned that already, and the slaves had uh, no citizenship. You it was for men. Women didn't vote. It was for then there was classification according to to income. So
mm.
but there was democracy. It was
Which we
there,
which we have some of that today.
and we
Definitely.
have it,
Yeah.
and not everywhere, and some here
No,
and
I'm
there.
talking about the income part, the class of when you're talking about the
Oh, that
yeah,
yes, of course.
yeah, yeah,
But in the end, um, in in democratic countries, you can vote even if you earn $1 a month.
yeah, right. Which in certain countries even they're trying to suppress the vote with gerrymandering and
Oh,
different
that,
forms.
there is
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
You
yeah,
can
yeah.
you can
Obviously.
make a mess of your democracy if you
Yeah,
have.
yeah,
But
yeah.
the principle exists. The Greeks had a philosophy about it, and they thought about it and wrote about it. And good government contributes to a good society.
And the next point was the Athenians, as we always go back to, where they attached the great import. You said they attached a great importance to the dual myth. And if you can elaborate on that a little bit, the dual myth about pure about pure lineage and auto. I'm gonna butcher the the words.
Yeah,
About the unmixed lineage. What do you call it? Autony. Auto.
yes. What you mean is that the Athenians imagined, because it was an imagination, that they were of pure lineage. They didn't mix with other with other Greeks, let alone non-Greeks, and that was said of some other peoples as well. And there was a belief that that was a good thing, something you wouldn't, most people wouldn't agree with nowadays, because we think it's healthy for people to mix around, and in inbred people aren't good. Then they believed the um, the uh, the Athenians believed they always, since time immemorial, had lived in their own on their own land, and they hadn't really mixed with others. And there were a few others
The,
who also
the
claimed.
Athenians were just a great group to study. To get all of this.
It's not something that the Romans ever claimed. They had
Right.
an empire, so an empire and empires are consist of different people. So
Right. And then you also talk about it at the end of the book more so about the Romans and they had there was a slight there was some similarities of course, but there was a difference when it came to the proto-racism as we talk about it
yeah,
from the Romans and the Greeks.
and,
And what was the I remember what was the primary short version of it, the difference between the ancient Romans and the ancient Greeks on when it deals with the other
the,
people.
the ancient Romans um, had an empire. They built an empire, and they maintained it for centuries and centuries. And you can go on and say that the Byzantine kings still called themselves Roman emperors until the 15th century. So they built an empire and managed to maintain it. You can't have an empire and also claim that you're always together with your own little group and you never mix with others, because you can only keep an empire together if the subjects have something to gain from it. Well, what they had to gain is Roman citizenship.
Mm,
There was integration,
mm.
and it was so Rome was an integrated empire, and the Athenians never succeeded in getting that because they wouldn't integrate. They didn't give it Athenian citizenship all over.
Yep.
Yeah.
I remember you talked about the Athenians when it comes to something about you really started to hear a lot of the rhetoric about the others when they were fighting the Persians.
Yes. Well, that
Be-
there, of course, the Greeks were the defenders. The Persians tried to conquer mainland Greece, and the Athenians and other Greeks managed to defeat them and keep them out, and
right.
that was
So in one sense, though, do you believe that in the mindset or the concept that they had, you believe that it also helped them in many instances or saved them, but ultimately, of course, um, like as you said, you couldn't have an empire with that
no,
type of mindset. But at like I said, that you just mentioned at that time when they were trying to rally up everybody and
yes.
and things like that against the
Well, I'm not saying that one should have an empire, but if you want,
yeah
then
yeah
you must make it worthwhile for people to keep together.
right yeah, and I'm glad you said that too when you said not should have an empire, because there are some people that I learned from that when we talk about empires or civilizations or things like that, when I asked some people about which civilization or empire do they think was the greatest, and they said that empire probably never even heard of. And
Yeah,
when you want to talk about high culture and morality and things like that, you know, compared to other people that make statues of themselves
yes,
and things like that, and with statue you're gonna have either slave labor or pretty close to that type of labor, and they wouldn't be as boastful as those, and so you probably haven't heard of them or they've been wiped out most likely.
yeah.
So
But
yeah, so I agree with you. I don't believe that the empire, empires are the best,
no,
but
no. I um, but
way to go. And yeah,
you know, you and I wouldn't enjoy living in an empire.
right,
But even with empires, you've got successful ones and failures. the,
right,
the Germans tried from 1933 until 1945, and they failed. the
right.
Romans, the Romans tried and succeeded. But still, that doesn't mean that I would enjoy being subject of
Right.
the Romans at any time.
I learned another word in your book, and you talk about it a lot. Physiognomics.
Yes,
The physiognomics, the discipline, physical differences between peoples,
yes, that is particularly uh, facial facial
facial features.
features, um, and that there was a strong belief that you could learn a lot from looking at people's heads, and that survived for a long time because
Obviously, yeah.
it is not so many generations ago that people still believed that you could measure skulls and learned a lot from measuring the skulls. That is a racist feature, and that I I'm I haven't heard that anyone still believes in it nowadays, but a generation or two ago it did.
Right, right, absolutely. And then you talk about the imperialism, the concepts of imperialism being further developed by Aristotle.
Yes.
So so you make the claim that he was that major figure that really pushed
Yeah,
this.
You,
Gotcha.
and that is
Despite all the, because you know most people when they hear Aristotle,
well,
the
Aristotle.
Stoics, yeah.
He was the teacher and mentor of Alexander of Macedon, and if anyone was an imperialist, it was him. So he must have, he may have been taught that by his teacher, and Aristotle himself said that the Greeks were the best of all, if only they could be unified and stick together, then they could rule the world.
Mm,
And he says the world.
right.
So the concept existed.
And that leads us to the next chapter of conquest and imperialism. When you talk about the subject of peoples and slaves, you rush into that a bit, and then brutes and animals. Speaking of the brutes, have you seen Exterminate All the Brutes, the HBO documentary?
Um,
Uh, there's a documentary film on
I,
HBO
I
called.
haven't seen it.
Oh, okay.
I have not
It.
seen
Have you heard of it? Exterminate All the Brutes.
it. I've heard of it, but I
Okay.
haven't seen it. Also, must confess, I have no TV.
Oh,
So
okay.
a
Got
lot
you.
I see films
Right, right, right. Yeah,
in
yeah, yeah. I
the
don't
movie
think. Yeah,
theater.
I think it's better not to have a TV at times. But then again, you do live in the Iron Dome, as they call it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But we'll get into that later. So brutes and animals, and well, actually, I want to get into the cannibalism because what's the connection that you made?
The well, the well generally accepted ideas of superior peoples, inferior peoples, and you the best live in cities, well ruled, good government. Uh, the worst are nomads. They just wander around, do nothing,
Right.
and there are specific features they especially dislike. Uh, Cannibalism,
Mm,
one of them. People with any kind of civilization don't eat each other.
right.
And they also, and a little, and almost as bad, but not as bad as that, is human sacrifice.
Mm,
They did it, by the way, the Greeks and the Romans, but
yeah.
they felt ashamed, and one shouldn't.
Mm. You know, when you get into the brutes and animals, you talk about that
Yes,
in chapter 2, I think the most, kind of, sort of, I think.
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
uh, because you've got people who are almost animals.
mm,
That there were people considered um, almost brutes, like the ancient Huns, the nomad
yeah,
people, good fighters, but they disliked them, despised them.
right. And then you and then the next chapter with fears and suppression, uh, the immigrant and minority problem. You draw a lot from Pliny
Yes,
and Cato,
yes. Uh, there we've got
which we see a lot of that today.
oh rather yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It's uh,
Here, Israel, where you at in Tel Aviv? For the
we,
audience that's now tuning in
uh,
or don't
we've
know, he's
got
in Tel Aviv. Yeah, go ahead.
we've got um, dislike of foreigners, this
Yeah,
hatred of immigrants.
yeah.
Got I and you
And you
get
see, and you see that a lot from Pliny and Cato. Well, Pliny pulls out some
yeah,
of Cato's work. You say,
it you see it particularly in Rome, because Rome was a big city,
yeah,
million inhabitants, and there were a lot.
multicultural.
Yes,
Yeah,
and then you get hatred of foreigners. So if Pliny and Cato dislike Egyptians, they're not talking about the Egyptians in what is now Egypt. They're talking
mm-mm,
about the Egyptians in the city of Rome.
mm,
That is a familiar pattern. That's of all ages and all times.
right.
I'm afraid.
And then you get into the expulsions.
That's
And
what you try to do when you
right,
don't have foreigners,
and
but they'll come back.
right, and contacts between peoples, a blessing and a curse.
That is, yes, nowadays we take it for granted that you've got trade. Even if you don't like the ex people, you can still sell them or you can buy from them. They were not sure in antiquity that being in contact with foreigners was a good thing.
Right.
You like take over the bad qualities and they wouldn't learn the good qualities. There was a general, it was a stereotype. Contacts between people were not necessarily good,
Mm, mm,
and because influence always goes is negative. The Germans were considered good fighters. When they lived near the Roman Empire, they would become less good fighters. It isn't that the neighbors of the Germans became good fighters; the Germans became less so. And that is a fairly common concept in ancient literature.
absolutely. Now then you get into a chapter with we're not gonna go to the we're not gonna go through the whole book. Those are some of the chapters I wanted you to just briefly touch on. We do want people to go get the book and read this work. But we're gonna jump all the way to the Ethiopians.
Ethiopians, I should explain, is in Greek and Latin is a term for all blacks in Africa, because Ethiopia is what they knew south of Egypt. Egypt was a Roman province, so they knew about Ethiopia, but they would call blacks from northwestern Africa also Ethiopians. So and these um, the I said something about the blacks in Athens.
Right.
in in the Roman Empire, they they didn't draw a lot of attention again because it wasn't part of the empire. um, and they generally they believed that uh, Ethiopians were black because they were burnt by the sun. The
Mm,
sun would burn them. And why are black babies black? That is acquired characteristics. So um, I would go and walk in the sun all day and would be sunburned.
mm,
My children would then be born black.
mm.
That's how they believed it worked. and and then they also had ideas about the effect of the sun on the body and
Right. Right.
yeah.
Um. So, do you remember your conclusion to that one? Because I was looking. Yeah.
My, my conclusion is that that it is an early form of racism, but
Right.
an early form because it is you believe there wasn't an idea that you had genes that would
Right.
be transmitted. It was an acquired characteristic, and it had some bad effects because that's what happened. Usually, when you weren't a Roman or a Greek, then you were something less than
Right.
that.
Now that brings me to the final the final chapter, and I would be remiss to say, or I would be lying, and that's why I call myself this channel the real Nordic Black. No, I would be lying if I didn't say that I didn't see or noticed a few, well, felt a little biases or leanings towards the Jewish side of things. And it,
Uh,
you are an Israeli citizen.
yeah, well,
The last chapter was the Jews. The conclusion that you put in there, you made it was extra long compared to the others.
yes, that
And you mentioned them, not only that they took up I don't know how many times you mentioned the Jews in the other chapters.
Um,
And
the
I mean, the Jews were in antiquity as well. So I mean, I know, I understand that, but go ahead.
the of course, I wrote about the Jews because it is a topic that is close to my heart. But there is another factor, and it is that uh, when it comes to the Gauls or the Germans or
Because to
uh,
be honest, when I first, and I don't mean to cut you off, to be honest, when I kind of perused through the book at first, that's what I kind of was like, because I was trying to find a when I first, I must say I was, I forgot what book I ordered. I ordered some other book before when it dealt with racism in modern times.
yeah,
And then I wanted to find out the origin of racism and things like that. And that's when your book popped up in Amazon and things like that. And I ordered it or whatnot. And I or I might have actually found it somewhere where they had a few pages somewhere before I ordered the book. And so I was kind of a little bit skeptic to read it because of all these, I was thinking, it like I said, you know, but I because of I didn't know that you were from originally from the Netherlands and things like that and the other side of the story, but still, you are Jewish.
yeah,
You are. I'm not saying that you can't write a scholarly book without biases. Everybody has biases, no matter what. But I was just saying I was kind of leery of you know reading this book and taking in all these yeah conclusions and really I wanted to
yeah. Let me say a few
I
things.
was worried it was going to be through just a kind of a Jewish lens in a way because I've seen a lot of
Well, it is the last chapter after all. I don't start with Jews. I
no
start,
I
and then
but the finale, the grand finale, right?
yes,
So
then there is the point that when you discuss Germans or Gauls or
right,
Britons, they didn't write in that period. There's no literature. The
right,
Jews had their own literature,
right, right.
and they were uh, Hellenized. They under Greek influence.
No, I'm
And
not saying I'm not knocking. I just want to make this sure that Jews always been alongside the black people when it comes to civil rights and things like that. And at the same time, there were some Jews that helped fund the slavery ships and slavery, you know,
yes,
the companies and things like that. So it's just
you
yeah.
please see that I didn't. I never funded slave trade.
Yeah, I know that. I know that. I know that. I know that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so
Maybe your ancestors did though.
um,
No. Well,
not not
yeah,
very likely.
yeah, yeah.
They lived in Germany and Poland, and I don't think that's where the
I
money.
got you. I got you.
More that was more.
I got you. But anyway, I didn't want to focus on that. But what I just told you about at first, like I said, I was kind of, uh, you know, I was
Yeah,
reluctant or a little skeptic to, before I even got into the book. And then as I kind of perused through it, I kind of was like,
it is.
mentioned, yeah.
It
He talks
is.
about the Jews a lot, and I was like, let's see where this book is gonna go. But
Well,
as I got into it, yeah,
the
I enjoyed
topic
it.
is usually considered of general interest because the Jews are monotheistic, and and much of the Western world now is Christian, and the monotheistic attitudes of the Jews were taken over by the Christians in part. So the the response of the Roman Empire to Christianity was in a certain manner also preceded by their response to the Jews. So I thought it would be of interest to people interested in
No, yeah,
civilization of the West and the East, in fact. So that's why I included that, and also because there's so in Greek and Latin literature such explicit dislike of Jews.
yeah, obviously, yeah. that too. Definitely they were. I'm not saying they weren't discriminated against at all and things like that.
Different.
But even you even said in this book though, like I said, that was in the beginning. But as I got to read it, because even you said that even they were discriminating against and all that, but even back then it wasn't like it wasn't a color thing,
No,
yeah, obviously.
physically,
Yeah,
you couldn't distinguish between it.
when it came to Judaism, the Jews, the discrimination, it was still different than it wasn't like, yeah,
They dislike them because of their eating habits,
right. You mentioned
and
that.
then because of the Sabbath, they didn't like people who spent a day doing nothing,
Doing nothing, they thought they were lazy and
and
greedy, not developed, avoid
and
eating pork. Yeah,
monotheism, because for them it was normal that you had as many gods as you wanted, and you can always add a god extra and pray or sacrifice. The Jews had the one and denied the existence of the others, and they didn't like that,
right, right,
and that's why they didn't like the Christians
right, right,
when they came around.
right. Well, um, yeah. Was there any other? Was that the other work that you had on your shelf? Was the other book when it came to racism and classical antiquity that you said? Was there another one that you
The
co-wrote, co-written, or
origins of racism in the
racism in
West,
the West? Yeah.
and that was a conference, and
That was public. That was public. Oh, that was a conference. Okay, I was about to say, was that
there was
published? Yeah.
a chapter about blacks by David Goldenberg, which is uh, precisely what is lacking in my book, and
Okay.
that's why I recommend that. Um,
So,
so
so besides your work, and to the people, I'm not just trying to cut this guy off because I know he has a little bit difficulties talking, and so that I try to shoot in and try to save him from talking as much. So, and I know it may come off hella rude to some people out there, but anyhow, and I know the time is ticking too. So, um, what other work, far as in the origins of racism, the invention of racism and classical antiquity, would you recommend that's not your work
um,
that you think is worth the
yeah,
squirrel's fart?
let me try to find it on my shelf. Just a moment.
Yes, sir.
Um,
And everybody, you tuned in to the Real Nordic Black channel. I appreciate if you are
um,
watching. You can leave a comment, like, or subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe. I'm gonna be having more.
if you
Yep.
want a different point of view, then there is this book. Um,
Cultural identity in the ancient Mediterranean. Got you.
that is, and it's edited by Eric Gruen from Berkeley, and
Okay.
that gives.
Let me take a guess. He sourced some of your work in there too.
Oh yes, and we've been friends for
Yeah.
decades, but he is one of the people who rather disagree with me and believes more in multicultural multicultural social elements. So if you want a rather more cheerful view of antiquity, then go to that book.
Oh, okay. That's for the audience, not me. I like it real and raw and yeah, uncut. Yeah.
Yeah,
So that would be okay. So that would be the one work that you would
yeah.
recommend. Who was your who was your we have probably about 5 more minutes before we get off or whatnot. Who would you who was your biggest influence far as in yeah
Sorry.
historians is concerned, or
Um, I'm not sure I understood your question.
yeah, no, who was your kind of biggest influence? So who did you look to
My
as
biggest
far as historians or
um,
whatever?
well, the not for this topic, not for the racism,
Oh,
because
for the racism topic. First
No,
thing.
I grew up with two with two major events in my background, and that was the the first, and that was the Second World War, where two things happened: the German occupation of the Netherlands and the German persecution of the Jews. So I was born afterward. I didn't suffer anything, but it kept fascinating me. So I wrote a book about occupation, and of course that also was influenced by the fact that I was living in a country that was and still is occupying another people. But so
Gotcha.
that was this book, The Limits of Empire, whereby
Right. That I mentioned earlier. Yeah.
it was I tried to find out how the Romans did the job and did it well, unlike the Germans, because they kept at it for centuries.
Okay.
And the second thing is, I was
So
in,
basically, you inspired yourself.
and well, there
Yeah.
were people who wrote about racism,
I mean, of course, the events, but you know, I was, yeah. I
but
meant
they
the,
denied it existed in Rome.
yeah.
Um, a very learned scholar named Sherwin White
Mm,
wrote about the topic, but he said it wasn't there. So
mm,
uh, I didn't agree. And then but on occupation, there was a great scholar, uh, Austrian, Jewish, British, but ended up at Harvard,
mm,
Badian,
mm,
and he essentially thought that people rather liked being subject to the Romans.
mm,
And he also said uh, uh, the Romans never planned it.
mm.
It just it just happened. They moved from one country to another, and I never believed that. I thought there was an ideology, and they wanted it, as they said, to conquer the world.
Mm. Now,
So those are influences, and there are, of course, great historians of Greece and Rome, but uh,
right,
Ronald Syme,
mm,
British.
right.
Uh,
Now, around that time, who was there any other like contemporary? Well, around the time you've written this work here,
yes,
um, were there any other people that are around your time or before you that kind of focused on the origin that of any note that
it
you recall?
um, no,
That Yeah.
maybe selfish, or I'm too old to remember. But
Mm-mm.
I wrote these books during periods of sabbatical leave in Princeton at the Institute for Advanced Study, and in Oxford at All Souls College, and there that I had cultural intellectual stimulation, not necessarily on these topics, but it was very good to be among the major figures in major US intellectuals.
Right.
And
No, but you know, yeah, no, that my question was there anybody that has written
all
uh that
written about this.
yeah,
No,
yeah, written the book on antiquity and you know, racism in antiquity like you have around that time
no,
or before you
yes,
that you kind of sourced or was able to source, not necessarily the primary sources that
no,
you sourced your book. Were there any
the
uh
one
yeah.
I mentioned. I mentioned a British scholar who wrote before me about racism, but denied it existed in
Denied
Rome.
it existed. That right. What
So
was his name again? The
uh,
You
uh,
don't recall?
just
Yeah.
to come back. Uh, um, it'll come back. Not
Yeah. No
not.
problem. No problem. Man,
No,
actually, we can. You maybe you did mention his name then.
I did mention it.
Okay, you did. So they'll go back to this.
Yeah.
It's no problem. So in the last, so that was him, and then there was Was there anybody else prominent that you can think of? He was the only prominent one that you can think of that really try to trace the history of before you or around the same time as you, that they try to trace the history or the origin of racism.
Lots of people wrote about racism, but they all argued that it goes back to the 18th century.
Got you, got you. And nobody has written
My
them.
point is that
Yeah,
it was,
right.
it
No,
had,
I got you. I got you. Then I probably didn't ask the right question. Yeah. So who else? So that was the only guy that you know to note that has taken it back to the classical times.
yeah,
Was that the English guy, but he had a different perspective.
yes.
Yeah, got you. So yeah. So with that being said, we're about to wrap this up, and we're gonna end it with I like I told you before, I'd be remiss to not talk about you are an Israeli citizen. You were born and raised in the Netherlands, correct?
Right?
So yeah, but what is your take and your opinion on what's going on in Israel right now? It's been going on for well before I was born. All I know is conflict in that region.
Yes.
I mean, that's all I know. When I think of that region, I'm like it's never gonna end. It seems like. I mean, the conflict is they'll never resolve things. And you have the Sheikh Jarrah, you have the Gaza Strip, all
Yeah.
kinds of problems that I don't even know. I mean, I'm not there, but from what the media brings out, Netanyahu, the African Americans even that they're trying to expel. The group of African Americans, the first 30 came from out of Chicago. That group there, and they grew and been there for a while now since the 70s. They're trying to expel this group of African American Jewish people, and also the Falashas, and like I said, the Palestinians. Um, the state resolutions that either never can come to agreements, and this new flare up. And people don't realize that I actually contacted Professor Benjamin Isaac before this big flare up that's going on in the media right now. So I couldn't have predicted that this was going to be going on right now. So I wanted to focus on the book. That was my original um, you know, reason why I reached out to him. But since then, there was been plenty of times that we had to reschedule, and so during those times, this flare up happened, and so. But like I said, I would be remiss not to ask because I have some Palestinian brothers, some Arab brothers that will be tuned in, and I'm also curious. And when you wrote in book about the history and of racism, and yet we're seeing seeing that in Israel.
Yes. No, I'm.
And some
I,
people call it a apartheid, becoming an apartheid state even, in different
yeah,
things. So what is your take?
my take is that uh, if you want someone to defend what Israel has been doing over the past decades, then it's not me because I've always been in the opposition as long as I've been a citizen. I've been,
You
and
heard that, people. He's not, yeah, he is not on the pro-Israel position on what's going on right now.
well, I'm not anti-Israel. I'm anti what Israel's doing.
Got you, got you.
I've been a member, and that's a formal a formal statement, and it, it's well known. I'm a member of a small opposition party, left wing in Israeli terms, called Meretz. They are going to be part of the next coalition in a
Mm,
couple of days, and they've been in the coalition only when the time of Rabin, at the time of the peace process, as it was in the 90s. So that is my political home. I'm not active in politics myself, but
mm.
that's my party. So in Israeli terms, left wing, I think there should be two states, a Palestinian state and Israel, and I can only hope that it will come to pass still, and that it's not too late.
And so I guess those would be your last words, yeah?
Um,
Yeah, go ahead.
my last words here to you, I hope not.
Yeah, to me. Right, right. Man, that sounded kind of, yeah.
Cool.
Uh, um, is there anything, well, I would usually end with, with people, or there anything that, you know, you're working on that you can speak of, or that you're contributing, or is there any new works or anything like that? Or are you just completely
Right.
retired in a way, or is there
I know
anything
I'm
new?
working all the time. I'm
Okay.
working on a book about ideology in antiquity, and mostly political ideology. And
Okay.
I'm trying to understand how people think about how they argue their politics and how they argue imperialism and why they think they could or should rule others.
Mm,
And that will be my next book. So
mm.
in a couple of years, you can ask me again. And
Absolutely, I will, because I'm gonna check it out. When is that? Oh, you just
it's
so
not
it's
it's
not.
not out yet. I'm working on it.
Yeah, it's not nowhere near finished. Then, no.
Um, could take
Yeah,
2, 3 years.
got you. But yeah, but definitely, I'm looking forward for that, and I will definitely be speaking to you on that. Thank you, Professor Benjamin Isaac, for this enlightened conversation. I hope some people can get some useful, some good information from this. Also, go to his book. Go order his book, The Invention of Racism in Antiquity, Classical Antiquity. You can get it on Amazon, or I was trying to see if you had a direct place where they get from you, but Amazon is the best place, I guess.
Yes,
Yeah.
Amazon or any online publisher or Princeton University Press, they'll sell it, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah. Right.
Uh, I
Got you.
bought it for quite a while.
Got you.
Yeah.
Alrighty then. Thank you, and you have a good evening.
Good evening, and thanks very
Oh,
much.